Hi, John. Welcome to the show. It's great to have you on.
Well, it's great to be here. Excited to chat today.
Yeah, absolutely. So, why don't we start with you telling us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Cool. Well, I'll give it the quick elevator pitch version here. I'm John Cook, and I'm the co-founder of the Seattle-based technology news site GeekWire. We cover everything from small startups up to the big tech titans of the world, many of which are based in our backyard here in the Great Pacific Northwest. Everything from Microsoft to Amazon to T-Mobile to Expedia. So we have all sorts of interesting news that we get to cover here at GeekWire. Our motto is what happens here matters everywhere. And we believe that many of the groundbreaking innovations that we see today, everything from robotics and AI to advances in health tech and biotechnology, are coming out of our backyard. So we are a group of journalists that cover that arena. I've been in the tech journalism field for coming up on 3 decades now, largely here in the Seattle area, and it's been a pretty wild ride to watch the transformation of this community, largely driven by the tech industry during that period. So, seen a lot of change, seen a lot of ups and downs, booms and busts, and looking forward to the next change and next transformation, which I know we're going to talk about probably a little bit later with
Sure.
generative AI. So,
That's
hot
so true.
topic on everybody's mind
That's
right now.
it. That's the
So,
looming
but
one.
yeah, we have a lot of fun. We host events. We have a great partnership with Solucio through our Geek Work program, which is our recruiting initiative that we do. But really, we see ourselves as a news site and community that brings people together through that news. So it's been a fun ride.
How did you get started in journalism and what led you to be the journalist?
Well, that goes way back. Interestingly enough, I grew up in a small town in Ohio, and my mom was a newspaper reporter growing up. She worked for the Akron Beacon Journal in Akron, Ohio, and she was a correspondent in one of their outlying counties that they covered, and was kind of a trend center in many ways because she worked out of the home even back then. The county we were from was the most far flung county, and they didn't want to send any of their big city reporters out to cover it, so they contracted with my mom, who kind of became a one person wrecking machine in that county, and became a force to be reckoned with in covering everything going on in the community. So that's really where my journalistic roots go back to. And then my dad was a small business owner, and had a couple of businesses in his career, including a auto dealership and financial planning firm that he started. And so between the two of them, I felt like where we are with GeekWire, which is really an entrepreneurial, journalistic,
Okay.
editorial
Right.
operation, pretty well positioned for that, given that background. So I trace a lot of my roots back to my parents and the role that they had, both on kind of the entrepreneurial side and the journalism side.
Media platforms have changed like crazy over not just the recent years, but over the past decade. Moving into GeekWire, what are some of those changes that you've altered in the approach of delivering information to an audience?
Well, one is immediacy. I mean, with the internet, obviously, it's just a medium that you need to be operating 24/7 and quickly. Speed
Right.
matters in this world, and being on top of the news really matters. Um, One of the biggest changes also making that transition from print to online, which I loved, was in the print news product, you were limited by what was called the news hole, and how much news you could physically fit into the printed product based on how much advertising had been sold that day. Well,
Right.
in the online world, it's an endless supply of content that you can create. Now, you could argue that that's created a lot of problems here recently with the rise of everyone spouting off on their favorite social media platform in recent years, and there's too much
Right.
capacity and too much content and too much misinformation. But
Right.
at the time of that transition, it was really enlightening and just wonderful in many ways because I felt constrained previously that I wasn't able to cover the beat that I was covering in the way that I'd like to. And so I think it's just opened up a lot of avenues to do journalism in a more creative manner.
Uh,
Uh,
yeah, that's really interesting. And obviously, there is that growing prevalence of user generated content, right? Yeah, I
well,
guess
yeah,
the
I like to say everyone's a journalist now. I mean, in some way. Now, some have different standards than others. Even some in mainstream media
right,
have very, very different standards
yeah,
than what that we adhere to.
right,
But it is true. I mean, everyone, and I always get really frustrated when we show up. So occasionally, we'll show up at some event and they'll say, "Oh, no media is allowed in this. We're not allowing any news media." And I'm like,
really,
there are 400 people in there with cell phones that can take a photo, put on a
right,
recorder, write a tweet, write a recap, do
yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
Why are we getting shut out? So
Were
it
were
doesn't
you
happen.
wearing were you wearing the hat that had the
Yeah.
press?
Yeah, of
Is
course.
that
Yeah. I show up everywhere in Seattle with that. That's kind of my trademark.
the quote unquote influencers have such a huge impact. How do you think that's affected the media landscape as far as, let's say, how GeekWire navigates that, competes against that, and then also in just kind of maybe how it's shifted consumer behavior as well?
Yeah. Wow. A lot to discuss there. Well, I think it's both positively and negatively impacted the
Right.
market.
Yeah.
I mean, it's let me tell you this from our vantage point and how we think about it, because we're pretty old school on this. Really, nothing has really changed that much in how we think about doing journalism today versus 25 years ago when I was starting in this world. It's still the same profession and ethics and storytelling and getting to scoops and getting to the story faster than anybody else and doing it better than anybody else and making sure it's accurate. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a pretty simple principle. And we adhere to that and try to uh, operate in that way as best as we can, even in a environment that is pretty cluttered and filled with a lot of um, bombast and opinion. We've tried to stay pretty true to our old school journalistic roots, and I still think it's a strength. I'm not sure everyone would, but we very much model ourselves on traditional news organizations that we respect and that we feel are driven by a desire just to tell stories, get information before anybody else can, and put it out there to be consumed.
That's
And
great.
I think we can make the claim that if we don't have more people doing that sort of journalism, our society's in a little bit of a rough shape, and we're seeing some of the impacts of that today, frankly. I mean,
Absolutely.
I'm a big believer that our democracy is only as strong as our media enterprises to tell the truth and do it so in a compelling manner that with the journalistic principles that matter. And a
Absolutely.
lot of folks have gotten away from that, granted, and they are chasing oftentimes dollars and eyeballs. GeekWire was never really set up. We never set out to be the biggest technology news site, and there are a lot of technology news sites out there. We
Right.
wanted to be high quality, do impactful journalism, and be connected to our community in very, very deep ways, both
Yeah.
for the events that we host and bringing that community together, but also connected from a journalistic standpoint so that our readers would trust us to give us information so we can be on top of the next story.
Obviously technology is worldwide, it's global, but, being that you're based in Seattle, how do you balance local coverage with, let's say national or international news?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is a balance, and it's something that we struggle with. And I will say our managing editor who oversees the news department, Taylor Soper, does a really good job of kind of making that decision and making hard decisions at times. There are sometimes national and global stories that break on the technology or business beat that we don't cover here. I mean, we have no connection point into it. And then there are some global stories that have very, very strong connection points into this world. Anything potentially that Amazon or Microsoft touches, for example, are usually stories that are global in nature. And so those are very important. And then on the startup beat, so covering like startups and venture capital, which has always been a really important part of our coverage area, we do very much limit that to the Pacific Northwest. So we don't
Okay.
cover startups in emerging from the Bay Area or Austin or Boston or Denver. Our startup coverage and emerging growth company coverage is really hyper local.
Right.
Then our coverage of like the big tech titans of the world tends to skew bit globally. So that's how we
Okay.
break it apart. Then we have to make the determination whether it's the most impactful story that we can pursue that's meaningful to our audience.
Now, what are some of the key factors that you see contributing to Seattle as a tech hub and the growth that it's had?
Yeah, well, certainly a lot of luck is one. I mean, there was luck that Bill Gates and Paul Allen were born here. I will say that a big component of our ecosystem and the success that Seattle has had as a market is tied into the University of Washington, which is a world-renowned engineering and computer science program, and just a major university in a major city, helps anchor that. Obviously, the going back further, the history of Boeing being here had a lot of engineering talent. That so there's a build mindset here, an engineering mindset, and also a pioneering mindset that goes even way back to the Klondike Gold Rush times. So
Yeah.
you add in all of those elements of the pioneering mindset, an engineering mindset, strong anchors with organizations like the University of Washington or the Fred Hutch Cancer Research Center or Pacific Northwest National Labs. A lot of these organizations have really helped bring just, I mean, at the end of the day, it's about where do smart people gather and hang out. And if you get
Right.
enough of those people hanging out, oftentimes magic can happen. And it happened in
Absolutely.
Seattle. But Seattle has very much grown up as a global city, and I would argue a big part of that is tied to the brands that have emerged here, whether it's Starbucks, REI, Microsoft, Amazon, Expedia, T-Mobile. Another big trend that we've paid a lot of close attention to at GeekWire is the arrival of the Silicon Valley tech giants.
With the tech ecosystem expanding so much in Seattle, what do you think the non-tech community, how have they reacted to it?
Yeah, this is a great question. Another topic we spend a lot of time on GeekWire, and I spent a lot of time thinking about this. It's become polarized. It's become, unfortunately, and this is where I think the tech ecosystem and the tech industry needs to do a better job. And uh, but it's in some ways tech has gotten a bad name and a bad label over many years, and some of that is deserved. But at the end of the day, these are pretty clean jobs. They're pretty well-paying jobs. Um, like it or not, it's changing the way we live, and you want to either be at the forefront of that or not. And so I'm proud of the fact that companies that I've been mentioning here have grown up here and that
Yeah.
are at the forefront of it. And certainly, as somebody who spent close to 30 years here in Seattle, I've seen these changes, and it has been rough in patches, and we've gone through an extremely rough patch here in the last several years related to uh, the homelessness crisis, drug addiction, and the right. I guess what's sad to me is that like we could have done better, and the rising tide should have lifted all boats more in the community, and that didn't happen as well as we'd like. Um, and because of that, now we do have a lot of polarization and anger. I'm confident, and I think maybe this is where Seattle's maybe a little bit different than San Francisco. I'm confident that I think Seattle, we have a new mayor in place, Mayor Harrell, who I think is getting on top of this issue and managing it pretty well. Um, there's still a lot of work to do, still a lot of problems. It's still um, a challenge to live here for a lot of people. And but if we should be able to, I think we should be able to solve this problem with the people that are here. And if we have people in the community that are stepping up and supporting this great city.
Yeah.
and we need more of that. And again, I'm confident, and I guess I'm cautiously optimistic on the path we're on. Again, it's been a pretty rough period through COVID, through this great boom that has created a lot of economic disparity in our community, which has created all sorts of problems. I mean, just with Amazon alone, a company that grown from a few thousand employees to, you know, upwards of 70,000 employees in the Seattle area you know, gosh, 15 years. I mean, it's like it's hard for uh, the infrastructure to keep up with that. And we didn't. And because of that, things started to crack and break. And not sure how that's going to play out. Now, I also root a lot of my thoughts, and Michael, we were joking at the beginning about our Midwestern roots, but I actually, that shapes me. I mean, when I was growing up, we listened to the Cleveland Akron news stations. That was our news
Right.
station we got. And I mean, that was heart of the Rust Belt, 70s and 80s. And those, and I mean, it was dire.
Right.
And to this day is still rough, when compared to a city like Seattle. And so I don't think people that are from outside people from backgrounds such as that have seen what
Right.
that sort of economic destruction looks like in a place, and um, don't necessarily realize how good it is. And so that shapes some of my views as well. I guess because I often say, hey, we've got a lot of problems here, a lot created by growth and prosperity in a booming city, but I've been in Cleveland, and it's, you
Yeah.
know, it's
Yeah.
rough. It's rough. And
Definitely.
so we got to make sure that we're on the path to sustain what we're doing, but also bring more people along for sure.
Right. I know that Seattle at one point had a pretty thriving startup community, a good venture capital ecosystem. So where do you see that now?
I think startups, for the most part, still want to be in innovative, creative technology hubs. They still need access to capital more so than ever, and I think that's the main issue facing companies right now is this massive whiplash effect that companies have gone through in the last 18 months, where you were essentially there was free money and you could raise $100 million venture rounds, and now it's winter times and like
Right.
go from growth at all costs to like get to profitability, and you might not be able to raise any more money. Well, that was a pretty rapid change, probably more rapid than I've ever seen, going through different booms and busts. And I think that just ties into larger economic factors that are at play. Um, and so I don't see that as tied as much to the cost of living here. I still see I mean, it's still a hub for innovation and startup activity. Frankly, a lot of people here are watching a lot of the layoffs that just happened in the tech industry to see where some of those people land and if
Right.
they start new companies. One of people have argued, I say economists have argued over the years that when Seattle went through its Boeing bust in the early 1970s, and there was the famous billboard that was placed up on one of the freeways around the Seattle area that the last person that leaves Seattle, please turn off the lights. That bust actually pushed a lot of engineering talent into the market to tinker on things and build some stuff. And so some of this displacement could actually lead to more economic activity here.
Right.
And I mean, some of the pay packages that these folks had and their severance packages are allowing them to take their time and doing what's next. So I'm still pretty bullish on this market and the startup ecosystem.
With venture capital and funding's crucial for startups. In your coverage of technology, have you seen certain areas in tech that were impacted, let's say, even now that we're post-pandemic, right? Like education, econ, um, healthcare, crypto,
Uh,
anything like that. But
you mean negatively impacted by the downturn?
yeah,
Well, you mentioned crypto there. I mean, yeah,
well, that's true.
that one was, yeah. It's funny because I was talking to somebody the other day about this, and it's especially as it relates to generative AI. And,
Right.
everyone's talking about it. I ran into a startup yesterday and it was really funny. The entrepreneur who I've known forever. And he was like, um, I said, how's it going? He said, it's tough. It's a tough economic climate to raise money. And he's like, just trying to figure out how I rebrand as an AI company. And
Oh,
that's what like every startup is doing. Like, how do we work AI into our business model? Because that's what's
right.
getting funded, and that's where the herd mentality of the VCs is going right now.
Yeah.
And this goes through waves. Certainly, we saw the waves go through with crypto. We've seen it with um, autonomous cars. We've seen it with the metaverse.
Right.
We've seen these
Yeah.
booms and busts on a lot of things. And so I feel the same about the AI boom that we're a part of. I personally think it's going to have a much bigger impact on us as a society, and it's going to really impact various businesses in different ways, more so than crypto or the metaverse boom.
Okay. Yeah.
So I think there's a little more meat to this. We're paying more attention to generative AI and covering it more closely than we did those other two booms, and especially crypto. We did not cover crypto that closely,
Okay.
and that might be in part just because of we're not in Seattle. We're not as big of a fintech market
Right.
as you would see in other areas, and so that's probably part of it.
You mentioned kind of a timeline. Different businesses have different timelines of adoption. How do you see journalism in
Oh,
that regard? And really, what I guess to unpack it, what are your thoughts on how generative AI in the future will be of technology, technology journalism and content creation?
yeah, a lot of stories out there right now about this and how it's impacting because the media industry is also taking a pretty big hit right now. And you're seeing a lot of layoffs. You're seeing a lot of discussion around this topic of how AI is going to transform journalism. I'll say everyone has a bit of a different opinion on this. Even people within the GeekWire newsroom have different opinions on this. Um, where I'm at, and where Todd Bishop, our co-founder, is at on this, who actually is spending the most time of anybody on our team with AI right now, and is doing some great reporting on this on the field. I view it as a tool and a potentially helpful tool that we should be experimenting with and should be learning and understanding. Um, so I would say, in the much more optimistic camp of how folks use this to do better research, to write better stories. It's certainly going to have an impact, but I don't think, kind of getting back to what I was mentioning before about our old school roots, I don't think it's replacing fully the journalists, especially
Right.
ones like ours at GeekWire. Like, we are so real time on our reporting. Like, we're we've always prided ourselves as being on the news, and generative AI will get there, I'm sure, and it'll be better,
Right.
faster, but, like, still, it's not there yet in terms of being on top of things, and I'm still of the belief you need a human guide to provide the right level of nuance and context, um, for basic things, though, like generating a report on earnings,
Right. Right.
earnings from a company. It's getting very close to doing that. Now, can it tell you the nuance between what this company's earnings say and what that does and why that company is maybe making a maneuver? Not yet. And I think
Right.
that's where journalists can still provide some extra value.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think that will hold true in the next 5 to 10 years?
I I wish I knew what was going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years. I would only say we need to just keep using it, playing with it, having it
Yeah.
be a tool for us. And
Yeah.
I think we'll learn as we go about how we can evolve with it.
Has it,
I
has it,
yeah.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I, I just think there have been waves of these technological revolutions throughout our history. And again, as I mentioned, I was a history major, so I tried to bring some of that perspective to what we do here. And at the end of the day, when automation hit the agriculture industry, and what I think it was, there's some stat that agriculture represented like 85% of the employment in the US, 150 years ago or whatnot. Don't cite me exactly on that, but it was a massive proportion of the workforce that was in agriculture, and then automation hit, and guess what? It absolutely reduced that to now where it's 1, 2, 3%.
Yeah.
Those people will go on to do other things that provide additional value. And there are so many problems that we need to solve. And I mean, that's the
Absolutely.
thing. I mean, look at what we're up against. I mean, just we're covering climate tech a lot right now at GeekWire.
Right.
It's
Right.
definitely an area of interest. We have a great reporter, Lisa Stifler, who is just amazing on this topic, and looking at all the different innovations from next generation batteries to nuclear power and like, this is innovation, and it takes creative minds to try to figure out how we're going to get a better renewable
Right.
energy
Yeah.
source for us. And that's going to and that's a big part of the economy as well. So I'm confident that we can transition, even with this wave coming, into things that are um, going to help society. I'm still,
Right.
still bullish. I mean, I
That's
know a
great.
lot of people have lost
Yeah.
their faith that technology and innovation is just part of the problem, but I'm not one of those.
I'm curious, from your point of view, how AI will be regulated. And let's say, for example, with GeekWire, how do you think you're going to have to set certain policies to ensure transparency or any
Yeah.
content
Yeah,
creation?
and you've seen media organizations do that. Some well and some not so well, where some were not too transparent about
Yeah.
disclosing what they were doing. Yeah, and I think that's just gonna be common practice, like almost like a byline on a story or a cut line on a photo. You gotta just be transparent. I feel as soon as you lose that trust and bond with that readership, and they don't trust you anymore, you've lost. And
Absolutely.
that's a real. Now, again, there's a whole nother class of media, which I'm not even going to touch, that intentionally, you know, um, provide information
Yeah.
to their user base in order to misinform, in order to
Absolutely.
put them in. And that's just a different. I don't even consider them in the same ballpark of what I'm talking about. But
Yeah.
they get lopped into the media world and news media, even though they're a different type of product in my mind.
Right. Right. I've kind of equated it to, professional wrestling,
Yeah, it is
the
very similar.
entertainment, right?
But you're absolutely right. That's the perfect analogy.
Do you use it in your workflow now?
I do a bit. Todd Bishop on our team is using it much more. He has been one example is he'll occasionally, when he's putting our daily newsletter together, he'll run it through ChatGPT, not for factual information, but just to do a secondary edit to pick up maybe punctuation
Right.
misses or maybe a misspelling. So I know
Right. Okay.
he's been using it in that form. Interestingly, was a bit of a weird one, but we do a weekly podcast, the GeekWire podcast. So make sure you subscribe and listen to that.
Absolutely.
On a recent episode, 2 or 3 weeks ago, we decided to do an AI simulation of our voices. So we took um, a few topics of the day. We were talking about Amazon and something else, and Todd ran it through ChatGPT and said, put together a script for a podcast that's in the jovial style of Todd Bishop and John Cook talking about the news of the day with a focus on these topics. And we had several topics. It pumped out a script that then Todd took to one of these voice engines, and after simulating my voice and Todd's voice for a matter of minutes, it then was able to read out the first like 5 minutes of the podcast in our voices, or simulate
Wow.
those. And I gotta say, my voice was pretty close. I mean, I was gonna say that's coming, but it's not coming. That's here, and
It's already
it's
here. Yeah.
and I just sent a story in our Slack thread this morning about this same technology that's now being used to scam people, where you can sound like one of your loved ones calling to a an elderly parent asking for money or
I
help.
saw that.
And, there are technologies obviously to combat that. There's a Seattle company called Haya that is doing some interesting work in call blocking and identifying spam calls. And so my question to the team was, gosh, with this new technology coming, what are companies like Haya doing to try to block this? So it's kind of like the cybersecurity wars. They're going to be bad actors, they're going to be good actors, and sometimes the bad actors win, sometimes the good actors tamp them down, and it seems like it's going to be just a constant battle. This is why you asked before about regulation. I wish I had a great answer for you. I don't. I think it is important that it gets regulated, but it needs to be regulated on a global basis. And I don't have a ton of faith that we can get our act together, even as a state or country, let alone as a global population, to try to
Right.
manage this. So it's going to
Yeah.
be it's a challenge.
But I think there's going to be a clear path for some industries to adopt, generative AI for the betterment, right? And as you said, increased productivity. What areas of technology do you think that clear path is going to be in?
Well, it can make you more efficient. I mean, it can reduce some busy work, and it can remove, and hopefully, as with a lot of technologies, can hopefully position you to focus on more important tasks. And and as I said, a number of these CTOs and VP of engineerings that we just interviewed, they were basically saying the same thing. So there's
Yeah.
one that he's we quoted John Zhang, who's the vice president of engineering at HighSpot, and he said, "It's saving us time, especially for generic implementations or generating code for some testing scenarios." So, I think it's pretty low level and they're using
Right.
it. But he said we've seen equal parts benefits and limitations using generative AI.
Right. Right.
So, I mean, I
It-
think that's what you'd expect, right? At this
yeah.
phase of where we're at.
How long have you known about generative AI?
Oh,
When
well,
did you see it coming?
of course, 30 years ago. No, I mean, it has been around. I mean, that's the thing.
Right.
This
Right.
is
Yeah.
not new. And it's frankly, it has gone through peaks and valleys, even in the last, 10, 15 years, since GeekWire was formed. It's not like you didn't hear about an AI company in 2015. You did. Yeah. And we were writing about them. It's just right now, I mean, it's just, again, um, a lot of this just comes in waves, and a lot of it becomes a bit of a herd mentality. You see it, the venture capitalists get all excited about it. They start throwing tons of money at it. There's a bit of a hype cycle and a herd mentality. Yeah, I was just looking back. I was trying to find an early story here on GeekWire. So I went back and I just did a Google search for GeekWire AI 2015. So 8 years ago.
8 years.
GeekWire goes back to 2011. I could try that too. But here
Right.
was the headline that popped up: Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, Reid Hoffman, and others commit $1 billion to stop AI from taking over the world. That was my number one. That was my number one search that just came up. So
I love
people
it.
have been talking about this for a long time. That's 8 years ago.
Yeah.
And this was OpenAI as a nonprofit foundation tasked with expanding research and practical application of AI tech.
There you
So
go.
we were covering it in 2015.
On it. I
Yeah,
love it.
yeah. So, yeah, it's been around for a while. It's just gotten really, really, really hyped. And
Yeah. Yeah.
that
I th-
again, that just happens in so many different cycles. And I'm pulling up. I was trying to figure out when Paul Allen, who's the Microsoft co-founder,
right.
started the AI2, the artificial intelligence center here in Seattle, because we covered that really. We have covered that really closely. Um, and so I'm trying to think, we did a big story on them in 2022. But I'm seeing, let me see. Yeah. Looks like it was 2013. They recruited
Wow.
Oren
Okay.
Essioni, the University of Washington computer scientist who came in. And so, I mean, we've basically been covering it since GeekWire was
Right. Right.
started. I mean, and this, the Allen Institute for AI is a huge
Oh yeah.
organization, and is doing. They're spinning out tons of companies now and doing tons of research. And we've been covering that organization since they were founded in 2013. So it's like, I don't know. I don't feel like we're like hopping on the bandwagon here, but there's just a
No,
lot more noise about it now than there
yeah.
has ever been.
John, I really appreciate the time and it was a great conversation. I literally have a stack of more questions, but we'll have to save that for another
Yeah,
time, I
part
think.
two. It's always fun. Great conversation and love the chat.
We'll put some of the links to the GeekWire podcast, and I hope you have a good show tonight as well.
Looking forward to it. Thanks for having me on.